Hello everyone, welcome to João's Lab first annual volleyball tournament. Before we get started, we need to make teams, so I'm going to split everyone up. Now please stand on opposite sides of the gym when I number you. 1, 2, 1 for you, and 2 for you, and 1 and 2. But wait a second. How could there possibly be more Team 2s than Team 1s? Okay, let's split up teams a bit more evenly. Let's have some Team 2s head over to Team 1's side to even it out a bit. Yeah, just pass right through the net there. Perfect. Now that the teams are even, it's time to tell you that there is no volleyball tournament. I know, I'm disappointed too. Never fear, we do have some good news. You just witnessed a perfect example of passive transport. Evening out the volleyball teams, moving the more populated team to the less populated team, passing through the net, zero energy expenditure on my part, except being an incredible host, of course. We snuck some science in right under your nose and your volleyball jerseys. Now it's time for us to dive into the topic of passive transport and put some science behind what you just saw. Now, what is passive transport? In a nutshell, passive transport is exactly like evening out volleyball teams to ensure an equal and fair tournament. Passive transport is a naturally occurring cellular phenomenon where substances, be it ions or molecules, move from a place of higher concentration to a place of lower concentration across the cell membrane. But before we dive too deep into the nitty-gritty of passive transport, there are some important things to know about these differences in concentration and the cell membrane. First, let's talk about concentration differences. When different areas of the cell have different molecule concentration, say inside the cell versus outside the cell, it's called a concentration gradient. When an ion or molecule moves from a high concentration to a low concentration gradient, it's called moving downhill. And it's the easiest way for a molecule to move. And what about the cell membrane? Why do we need a special process to pass through a thin membrane? Well, the cell membrane is what we call selectively permeable. That means that the cell membrane strictly regulates what is or isn't allowed to pass through it. Selective permeability is absolutely integral for the cell to survive. This way, the cell can keep the nutrients it wants, get rid of stuff it doesn't want, and remain stable. It's a win, win, win. Okay, so passive transport is about molecules moving along a concentration gradient through a selectively permeable cell membrane. But what about the passive part? Well, passive transport is exactly what it sounds like. Transport that happens passively. No energy is required from the body to carry out passive transport. We can save all our adenosine triphosphate or ATP for active transport. So sit back, put your feet up, and relax while passive transport is going on at the cellular level. No effort required. This process is extremely important for one big reason. Well, we actually need it to properly function. Imagine that your volleyball team had only half of the members show up for a game. You obviously couldn't play to the best of your abilities. In fact, you'd probably have to forfeit. Think of it like a volleyball player, an ion, going from one side of the court to the other to even out the team, moving downhill of the concentration gradient and allowing the game to go on. Except they pass through the net, the cell membrane. Passive transport makes sure that your cells have all of the molecules, ions, and substances they need in the right amounts to properly function and achieve homeostasis. Now that we know what passive transport is and the key players involved in it, talking about ions and molecules, selectively permeable membrane, and absolutely no ATP, it's time for us to talk about the different kinds of passive transport. There are three main ones we'll be looking at today: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. Filtration is another type of passive transport, but that's a video for another day. Diffusion is one of the main types of passive transport. Remember how we talked about a substance, molecule, or ion moving from a high concentration to a low concentration? Yeah, remember that concentration gradient we just talked about? Yeah, that's diffusion. Diffusion is super important for keeping the body in tip-top shape. If we didn't have diffusion, we wouldn't be able to maintain optimal concentrations of various molecules and ions in the body. Our volleyball team would constantly be imbalanced, and we'd always have to forfeit our games. When talking about passive transport, there are two types of diffusion that can happen: simple or free diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Let's start with a simple one. We're going to talk about simple diffusion, which is unsurprisingly a simpler process. Simple diffusion follows the main principles of diffusion, where molecules, ions, and compounds move through the cell membrane from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration. In simple diffusion, molecules are able to move freely through the cell membrane. And this is because only small, nonpolar, or hydrophobic molecules take part in simple diffusion. After all, a hydrophobic molecule has no problem moving through a cell membrane with hydrophobic properties, right? One example of passive diffusion is the movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. Both oxygen and carbon dioxide enter the bloodstream through simple diffusion, and this same process occurs in the lungs too. In the alveoli of the lungs, oxygen is more concentrated versus the blood vessels. So through simple diffusion, oxygen moves from the lungs to the blood. With carbon dioxide, the concentrations are opposite, so CO2 moves from the blood to the lungs. The other kind of diffusion is facilitated diffusion and follows the same main concept with a few differences. The diffusion part of facilitated diffusion is the same: molecules or ions moving along the concentration gradient in a cell without the help of ATP. However, the passing through part is where things get different. Facilitated diffusion is a process for large polar molecules. Remember how we said that the cell membrane is non-polar? Polar does not mix with non-polar. They're quite opposite, in fact. So these molecules need a bit extra help. Molecules and ions get help during facilitated diffusion in one of two ways: protein channels or carrier proteins. Channel proteins open up a sort of tunnel through the cell membrane, allowing the molecule or ion to pass through like a pore. The other option for sneaking past the cell membrane non-polarity are carrier proteins. Large molecules or ions need to be actually carried across the membrane by carrier proteins called permeases. And permeases envelop the molecule that needs to pass through and carry it across the membrane themselves, since they have an all-access pass. Permeases have my vote for MVP on this volleyball team, let me tell you. Facilitated diffusion can occur in the human body during glucose transport. Glucose is a pretty big polar molecule, and remember, the cell membrane is non-polar. Specific carrier proteins, called glucose transporters, need to help glucose pass through the membrane in and out of the cell. The third type of passive transport is osmosis. The great thing about osmosis is that if you understand simple diffusion, you'll understand osmosis. It's a similar process, but with water. Osmosis, by definition, is the movement of individual water molecules through a semi-permeable cell membrane. The water molecules move from an area with high water concentration, so lots of water and few solutes, to an area with low water concentration, not much water, lots of solutes. The difference in water concentrations between two areas, the high versus low concentration, is called an osmotic gradient. Fancy, right? So for osmosis to occur, it needs to satisfy three requirements we just talked about. Water molecules need to move downhill, high to low concentration, presence of selectively permeable cell membrane, and osmotic gradient. A good example of osmosis in the body is what happens in our gastrointestinal or GI tract. Once the food in our stomach mixes with your stomach liquid and moves to your intestines, the water separates out, bringing nutrients into your epithelial cells. Remember, no water, no osmosis. Passive transport, the hands-off, laid-back, low-effort molecule transport method. Simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis, almost as exciting as a volleyball tournament would have been. But I digress. Thanks for sticking around to learn more about the wonders of passive transport, and click on the next video to continue learning more about the human body. Like the video if you want to see more of these on this channel, and subscribe if you don't want to miss the next upload. Until then, I will see you next time. Yeah.